Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Art of Being a Woman. I'm your host, Courtney, and today we are discussing the art of releasing perfectionism. I am very excited to discuss this topic because it's a big one. This is something that many women struggle with silently, and there's many reasons why women specifically struggle with this. It extends to men as well, but I want to focus primarily on the woman's side of things and why perfectionism is detrimental to our own happiness, our own success in life. In my experience, I remember realizing that I was a perfectionist when I hit puberty. I became hyper-focused on my body and what my body looked like in the mirror. And up until that point, I never cared because I was a kid and I just cared about being happy, not about how I looked. I didn't realize that they were correlated. It wasn't until the people around me started mentioning that my body was changing, and I was also putting on some weight. In the beginning, when I was told those things, it definitely hurt my feelings, but I also didn't want to admit that it hurt my feelings. So I would brush it off. I wouldn't take anyone's opinions seriously, at least not to their face. But I remember that I would look at myself at the end of the day and really internalize all the comments people would say to me about how my body was changing, how I was putting on weight. And I remember thinking to myself, is this a bad thing? It must be a bad thing if all the adults around me are concerned with how they look and how much they weigh. Perhaps I should be concerned about those things as well, or I'm going to be an adult that is still trying to get to an ideal body. So from a very young age, I decided I'm going to try my best to get into great shape now and maintain it as much as I can so that when I am an adult, I don't feel that pressure to change how I look. As I got older, my weight would fluctuate a lot. I would have phases of being very thin and then relaxing with myself and allowing myself more leeway with the things that I ate. And then I would gain weight back and I would be disappointed when I would look in the mirror and realize, wow, I made so much progress and then I lost it all. How could I do that to myself? And then that would lead to me being strict with myself and restrictive again with what I ate. And it was just an on and off yo-yo of weight fluctuation. And it wasn't until one of the last times I lost weight through strict dieting, through unhealthy dieting, that I realized even when I'm thin, I'm not happy with myself. Even when I'm thin, I don't feel good enough. I don't feel like I made it or that I could relax. It was like this never-ending pressure to feel perfect when I looked in the mirror. And no matter how I would try to achieve that goal through being hyper-controlling with my eating habits and my exercising, there was always something else. Whether it was my body proportion, whether it was cellulite or stretch marks, you name it. It was like my mind was so quick to find something else to obsess over that it became exhausting. And I decided that something has to change. I can't keep going about feeling good in my own skin through excessive control and through, honestly, self-hatred. And I remember when I made that decision in my early 20s, I relaxed with the dieting and I allowed myself to be more of an intuitive eater, which honestly is not always ideal because if you are someone that eats emotionally, intuitive eating can be you eating every hour, and that's not necessarily healthy. It took a lot of inner work to find a balance between striving for greatness for myself with myself, meaning I'm on my own team rather than feeling like I'm trying so hard to change who I am, and also being just as happy with where I am in the current moment, even if I didn't achieve my goals. I wanted to start this episode with sharing my personal story and my experience because perfectionism is tricky. There's the parts of ourselves that love that we're perfectionists. We love that we are so good at doing certain things, even if it comes from a place of frustration, anger, disappointment, sadness, because at least we achieved our goal. At least we achieved our version of success. But then there's also the parts of ourselves that are perfectionists that we know deep down we're not that proud of and we're not that happy about, because it causes us to pick ourselves apart and to never feel like we're enough and to never feel like we'll ever get to a point where we don't have to try harder to achieve something for ourselves. Whatever energy you put into achieving something is the energy that ends up manifesting. For example, earlier I mentioned that I would lose weight due to me being unhappy with my body. The end result was achieved. Physically, I lost the weight, but I still felt very unhappy with my body, even though I achieved my goal. I thought reaching that quote unquote perfection was the solution, but it was never about reaching the goal. It was that my mindset and the way that I viewed myself was damaged and it was distorted. Sometimes we need to get to that point where we achieve our goal to realize that it doesn't equal happiness. Sometimes we can think that we're not perfectionists at all. We just know what we want and we don't want to settle. And when we get what we want, we're going to be happy. But that's also distorted in mentality, because you should be able to feel equally happy without achieving your goal and when you achieve your goal. If you need that goal to make you feel happier than how you feel right now, the problem isn't that you didn't achieve the goal. The problem is that you're tying your self-worth to achieving a goal. And I promise you, if you are in a place in your life where you feel like once I achieve X, Y, and Z, I will be happy, that's all I want from life, I am telling you right now that it's not true. Nothing outside of us can change how we feel on the inside. If we do not work on changing the inside as we get closer to changing our external reality and changing ourselves physically, there's going to be a disconnect when we achieve our goals. So I'm not saying don't have goals, don't lose the weight, don't go after achieving greatness. Of course, do all of those things if they excite you, but make sure that throughout that journey, you remain loving towards yourself, you remain happy with yourself, and you remind yourself that you don't need to achieve your goal to be happy. It's just a bonus, and you're more focused on loving the journey and loving who you're becoming as you're achieving the goal. As always, I'm going to get into 4 steps that I wrote on Instagram and Threads, where I post a lot of the topics that I discuss here on the podcast in a written format. So if you aren't following me on those platforms, I would love if you can join me at She Is Artfully Woman. Let's get into step 1. No perfectionism is avoidance of self-acceptance. When we're seeking perfectionism in an area of our life, it can feel like we're raising the bar on our expectations, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when we set a goal of achieving a more perfect version of ourselves, we are also telling ourselves that who we are right now is not perfect. Who we are right now is not just as good as that future version of ourselves that's going to be close to perfect. And we can play devil's advocate with this, and we can use my personal example of weight loss. We can be severely overweight and know that it's not good for our health. And then we know that a healthier version of ourselves would be, quote unquote, a better version of ourselves because they're healthier and they take care of their body. But we need this current version of ourselves to achieve our goals. We need the version of ourselves that is going to put in the work day after day without seeing results, which is honestly the hardest part of achieving a goal. When you have to put in that work constantly and not know if it's going to pay off. We need that version of ourselves to remain confident in herself so that she doesn't give up. So when she achieves her goal, she's not surprised because she believed in herself the whole entire time. And not only did she believe in herself, she loved herself even before she achieved her goal. Because ideally, we don't just want to achieve something. We want to feel happy that we achieved it. And we want to feel so proud of ourselves that we achieved it. But if we're on the path of achieving a goal and we won't allow ourselves to be happy or satisfied with our results until we achieve our end goal, then we're pushing ourselves away from what we truly want. That feeling of happiness, that feeling of pride, that feeling of accomplishment. It's never going to be the outcome that gives us the feeling, that we're craving. It's always the feeling that creates the outcome. And whenever we do it backwards, whenever we focus on the outcome instead of the feeling is going to be missing. The issue is never our skills or our appearance. It's always our resistance to accepting ourselves as we are. Self-acceptance is truly how we start replacing perfectionism. The more that we accept ourselves as we are right now, when the urge to be a perfectionist comes up, the more we'll be able to achieve our goals and become better versions of ourselves, of course. But also, the more we're replacing this feeling of lack, this feeling of low self-esteem, this feeling of not being good enough with love, with appreciation for ourselves. I know when I think about past versions of myself now, I have a lot of compassion and gratitude for younger versions of me, because at the time, I had no clue that I would end up where I am today. But if it hadn't been for the younger version of me never giving up on me and always seeking a deeply fulfilling path in life, an honest path in life, I would have never been able to discover how to outgrow perfectionism. And as long as we avoid self-acceptance, perfectionism will continue being a distraction from doing the real inner work. And you can't outrun the inner work forever. You will just be stuck on a loop. You'll set a goal, you might achieve it, but then you'll go back to square one and you'll wonder why. And it's because the goal is not the point, because you've achieved the goal and nothing really changed. You didn't feel that much different. The only way to break that loop is self-acceptance. That's how you really set yourself free. Step 2, challenge the all or nothing mentality. Part of perfectionism is wanting to really be the best, whether it's the best version of ourselves, the healthiest version of ourselves, the most talented version of ourselves, you name it. But the thing is with the all or nothing mindset is that it pretends to be ambition and it pretends to be high standards. But every time we get close to achieving anything, the bar moves higher and higher. So progress will never feel good enough. I think this is something that can be hard to admit, because I remember when I was in my unhealthy dieting phase, if anyone were to ask me if I was being a perfectionist, and if anyone were to ask me if I have an all or nothing mentality, I would completely shut them down and tell them I don't. I just have a goal in mind. I just want to achieve my goal. But the truth is, I did. It wasn't enough for me to hit a certain number. Once I hit a certain number on the scale, it didn't feel how I expected it to feel, because my mindset didn't change. So I would look in the mirror and I would feel the same way I felt about myself when I was much heavier. And that's body dysmorphia. That's something that we all have heard about, and unfortunately many of us have experienced. And that's truly where it stems from, that disconnect. So I remember I would originally have a goal of achieving a certain number on the scale. And then once I hit that number on the scale, I would drop it lower and lower and lower. And luckily I wasn't medically unhealthy. My weight wasn't too low that I was sick, thank God. But now looking back, I can admit that it was an obsession. It was never enough, no matter what I did. I remember I would lose the weight and then I would set another crazy goal to lose even more weight just to see if I can do it. And then when I did that, I realized, okay, well, I don't have abs. And I didn't realize, okay, well, you need to work for abs and that takes a long time. So I would start exercising a lot. And then after I started exercising, I realized it was making me stressed out, because I was so stressed out over the amount of food I was eating. And then on top of that, I was so stressed out over which workouts I needed to do and how often I was doing them, that I was just overwhelmed internally. And from the outside looking in, you can't tell when someone is going through that. You just think, wow, they're really prioritizing their health. They lost a lot of weight. They look amazing. And honestly, I think that's truly all I cared about at the time. I think I only cared about looking perfect. I didn't care at all about how I felt, clearly, because that's what I ended up manifesting. I ended up manifesting looking, I guess, perfect from an outsider's point of view, but internally, I felt very far from it. I truly felt like nothing I was doing was ever enough. There would always be another excuse to lose more weight, whether it would be a dress that I liked that didn't fit how I wanted it to fit, or a picture that was taken of me that I felt made me look so much bigger than I actually was. It would be crazy. It would be the littlest things, anything to keep me on that rat race of constantly striving for more and never being happy and never being satisfied and never accepting myself for who I was. Sometimes we think perfectionism is our fuel, that if we have such a big goal in mind, that it will motivate us and it will push us further to achieve a goal. And I hear that because I've been there and I've done that to myself, and it could work. You could really use perfectionism to fuel you to achieve your goals, but you will feel like shit when you achieve them because you were treating yourself like shit to achieve it. We have to make sure that our fuel is coming from self-acceptance so that whatever it is we're striving towards actually lasts, and we don't get sucked back into the same loop again to learn our lesson again on self-acceptance. Yes, taking the path of self-acceptance might mean that it'll take longer than when you are putting pressure on yourself to achieve your goal in a certain time frame, whether we want to achieve our goals before the year ends or we want to achieve our goal before our birthday. Doing those things is also a form of perfectionism and all or nothing mentality. It doesn't need to happen at a specific time. We're just happy it's happening, and we're just happy that we're getting closer to achieving whatever it is we want to achieve. And because we know that we're achieving it, the timing doesn't really matter, or at least it shouldn't matter. When we feel so desperate to achieve something at a certain time frame, it's because we don't feel good enough right now. And that's truly the problem. The problem isn't that we're not where we want to be. It's how we see ourselves now when we are not where we want to be. Step 3, interrupt the fantasy that perfection will fix everything. I touched on this a few times, so I will only discuss this briefly again. Whatever our version of perfection is, it doesn't lead to fulfillment. It doesn't lead to happiness. It doesn't lead to confidence. It doesn't lead to joy. I know this because I've experienced it firsthand, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's experienced it firsthand. We have moments in our life when we achieve things that we've dreamt about, that we've hyper fixated on, that we've manifested. And sometimes we achieve those things and we feel great. And when that does happen, where we feel great when we achieve something and it lasts, it's because we felt great the whole time. We felt great before we even achieved that goal. An example of that for me was when I was in OT school. Just me getting accepted into the school, I felt great. I felt like I made it. I got into the school, I was happy, and I just knew that if I got into the school that I would graduate. Of course, things came up along the way. I had my doubts. I became nervous at certain points when the schoolwork became more challenging and there was uncertainty with passing certain classes. That's all normal, but I kept my mindset sharp and I kept my beliefs sharp. I told myself that even if I didn't graduate for whatever reason, I wouldn't even be upset at myself because I knew that I tried my best. And what's more important to me than anything is what I learned along the way. And I learned so much. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about becoming a professional. And thank God I graduated in the end. Now, when we strive for something and we don't do that inner work and we don't remain mentally strong, which truly means confronting the feelings that come up within you as you're working towards your goals. Because sometimes we just have those bursts of energy and we're excited, we're motivated to accomplish a goal, we're motivated to lose weight, whatever it may be. And then the doubt starts to creep in. Then things start to become more challenging. And those are the moments when we need to become mentally strong. And that doesn't mean that we're going to feel strong when we have to exercise our mental strength. We're probably not going to feel strong. It's usually those moments of weakness that breaks us open and allows us to regrow a stronger mindset. Just like a muscle. So anytime you're experiencing doubt and fear and worry that you might not achieve your goals, those are the moments that you need to remind yourself that Achieving your goals will not fix everything. Overcoming your need for perfection by exercising self-acceptance when it's hardest to do so is what will fix everything. Because challenges are always going to come up, no matter what goal you set for yourself and no matter what you achieve. Think about the richest people in the world. They go bankrupt. They lose money. And what determines whether or not they keep that money is their mindset and the confidence that they have in themselves. That confidence comes from accepting ourselves and accepting our circumstances and our situation as they are constantly, even when it's not easy. Especially when it's not easy. Whenever we achieve our goal of perfection, we will get that temporary boost of confidence, but it won't last because it's coming from having to prove something, whether it's proving something to yourself or it's proving something to other people. And when we have to prove something, that means we don't believe it. We don't believe in ourselves. We need something outside of ourselves to reassure us of the truth. The goal is to shift from proving into knowing. We don't need proof. We don't need to prove anything to ourselves or other people to know that we are perfect the way we are right now. There shouldn't be a difference in the level of self-acceptance between all versions of ourselves. Step 4, learn how to overcome your inner critic. I spoke about the inner critic in 2 other podcast episodes that I highly recommend because I really go deep into who the inner critic even is, because it's not us. That's the truth. Episode 23, The Art of Exposing the Ego, is the first episode where I dive deeper into who the inner critic is. And the next episode is episode 26, The Art of Recognizing When the Ego Takes Control, because the ego shows up as many different characters in our mind, not just the inner critic. So if you want to learn more about how to really get to the bottom of your inner critic, I highly recommend you listen to those episodes in that order. But back to this step. What the inner critic will do is it will test us. It will send us a thought that challenges our self-acceptance and our self-esteem. In that moment, we have an opportunity. We have the opportunity to allow that thought to make us feel bad about ourselves, or we can use the opportunity to strengthen our mindset, strengthen our self-acceptance, strengthen our confidence, and ignore it, which sounds crazy because sometimes the inner critic can be wild. The inner critic can say exactly what we're insecure about, exactly what our fears are. But truthfully, it's really doing that. It's hitting at our most insecure parts of ourselves because it wants us to evolve. It wants us to grow, and we can't truly build our self-worth and our self-acceptance when there's still parts of ourselves that make us cringe, and there's still parts of ourselves that we get self-conscious about. And this is very hard to do, especially in the beginning. It takes a lot of self-awareness. You have to be aware of the thoughts that are surfacing in your mind. And there's a lot of them. We have so many thoughts that cross our mind throughout the day. And the more that you have entertained those more self-deprecating thoughts in the past, the more consistent it'll be. So if that is something that you are experiencing, definitely check out those 2 episodes I mentioned and know that unconsciously you have been entertaining thoughts that have been challenging your self-confidence and your self-acceptance. What can you do to really overcome your inner critic? What I personally do is I become aware of the thought, and once I become aware of the thought and I notice how it's trying to make me feel, I pause and I ask myself, is this really how I want to feel about myself? The answer is no. And then I don't react. I don't cringe internally. I don't allow myself to be in a bad mood. I don't allow myself to act on whatever the thought is saying. And every time I do that, the inner critic becomes weaker and weaker. A lot of times, the inner critic will be very strong to almost give you an opportunity to release all the self-doubt that we have about ourselves. But it can be very overwhelming because we are just beginning to become self-aware of our thoughts. But don't allow it to discourage you. You don't have to be perfect when you're overcoming your inner critic. Remember that you're doing it because you love yourself, because you deserve to only entertain thoughts that uplift you. And remind yourself that even if you have let's say, 100 negative thoughts about yourself that surface in a day. If you can overcome even 3 of them, you're making progress. I know that meditation helps. I definitely meditated a lot more when I was in the thick of this step of overcoming my inner critic. But now, to be honest, I do not meditate as much. So play around with it. See how you feel. If you're in the beginning stages, definitely meditate. I recommend it because you will notice how you can be doing absolutely nothing and the thoughts are just absurd. Like, you know very well you would never talk to yourself like this out loud. Yet these thoughts are just running around in your mind. And again, the goal isn't to check these thoughts and to talk back to these thoughts. The goal is to just notice them. Notice how wild they sound, how out of pocket they sound, how they seem to just be surfacing to get under your skin, and let it go. Don't react. That's what lets these thoughts die. Thoughts need our energy to stay alive. We decide which thoughts we entertain. We decide which thoughts we give power to. And by becoming more self-aware of our thoughts, we reclaim our power. We start to overcome our inner critic. And when we overcome our inner critic, self-acceptance becomes almost natural. And when self-acceptance becomes almost natural, the desire to achieve perfection dissolves. There is no longer a desperation to achieve something when we know that we're going to feel just as good now as we will when we achieve it. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. I hope that this conversation provided clarity on the topic of releasing perfectionism. And I want you to know that if you are in the thick of being a perfectionist, accept it. That's always the first step. Acceptance. We're always doing the best that we can with what we know. And as we learn more about ourselves and about life through experience or through a podcast, we can start implementing what we learn through action, and we can see what feels good and what makes us feel better. And ultimately, it will lead you towards your own path of happiness and fulfillment. If you like this episode, please rate this podcast and share it with a friend or a family member, anyone that you think would benefit from this episode. I love you all. Have an amazing week. Until next time, bye for now.